His mistress begged a $500 billion tech empire for a life-changing partnership, completely unaware that the quiet woman she kept humiliating was the empire's hidden heir. Before the night was over, a family that had spent decades building its fortune would watch everything begin to slip away. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Please stick with me, because every detail in this story matters. Tinsley Rowan had spent most of her life feeling like she never truly belonged in her own family. No matter how hard she worked or how quietly she carried herself, she was always overlooked while her younger sister, Sloane, received endless praise. The entire family was focused on celebrating Sloane's lavish engagement to rising political star Grant Mercer, and every influential guest in the city had been invited to witness the occasion. To Tinsley's parents, she was nothing more than an afterthought. When a server accidentally dropped a tray, leaving food and drink scattered across the ballroom floor, they immediately blamed Tinsley without asking a single question. In front of wealthy business leaders, politicians, and family friends, they ordered her to grab a towel and clean the mess herself. Humiliated but refusing to argue, Tinsley quietly knelt on the polished floor and began wiping up the spill. Soft laughter spread through the ballroom. Then, without warning, an older billionaire seated at the head table suddenly pushed back his chair and stood frozen in disbelief. The moment he recognized Tinsley, the entire atmosphere in the room changed. The ballroom grew unusually quiet as every pair of eyes settled on Tinsley. Instead of stepping in to stop the humiliation, her parents watched with cold expressions. Her father let out a bitter laugh and said that, for once, she was actually contributing something useful to the family. A few guests chuckled, taking his comment as harmless humor, while others looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge the powerful Rowan family. It wasn't the first time Tinsley had been treated this way. Growing up, she had always lived in the shadow of her younger sister, Sloane. Every success Sloane achieved was celebrated with pride, while Tinsley's accomplishments were ignored or dismissed. Whenever something went wrong, she was the one blamed, whether she had anything to do with it or not. Over time, she stopped defending herself because no one ever listened. Several years earlier, Tinsley had quietly left the family business after realizing her parents cared more about status, wealthy connections, and public image than honesty or hard work. She walked away without asking for a single dollar, choosing to build a future on her own terms. Very few people knew where she had gone, and she made sure her new life remained completely private. As she continued wiping the polished floor, Sloane leaned toward Grant Mercer and whispered another cruel joke about her older sister. They both smiled, convinced Tinsley would always be the forgotten daughter who had failed at everything. None of them had the slightest idea that the woman they looked down on had been living a life far beyond anything they could imagine. Standing only a few feet away was Vanessa Cole, a confident woman introduced to the guests as an independent business consultant. Most people at the gala accepted the explanation without question, but the truth was far different. Vanessa had been carrying on a secret affair with Grant Mercer for months, convinced that their future together would be filled with power and wealth once his plans fell into place. Throughout the evening, Vanessa eagerly inserted herself into conversations with investors and executives. She repeatedly hinted that she was on the verge of securing an exclusive partnership with a mysterious technology empire valued at nearly $500 billion. Although she never revealed the company's name, she spoke as if the agreement had already been finalized. The confidence in her voice drew attention, and many guests congratulated her before any deal had even been signed. Whenever her eyes landed on Tinsley, Vanessa's smile turned into open contempt. She looked at the woman kneeling on the ballroom floor and assumed she was unemployed, unsuccessful, and completely dependent on her parents. She made cutting remarks loud enough for nearby guests to hear, joking that some people were simply born to serve while others were destined to lead. A few people laughed, encouraging her to continue. Vanessa proudly declared that once the partnership was complete, her fortune would surpass everyone else's in the room. She believed she was only days away from joining the ranks of the nation's wealthiest business leaders. Tinsley heard every insult but never reacted. She calmly finished cleaning the floor, keeping her emotions hidden. The silence she chose was not weakness. It came from knowing something that no one else in that ballroom could possibly imagine. Years before that unforgettable evening, Tinsley had walked away from her family's mansion carrying only a small suitcase and enough savings to start over. She never asked for financial help or tried to prove anyone wrong. Instead, she focused on creating a life built on her own abilities. Her determination eventually led her to Leon Ashford, a legendary investor known for recognizing talent where others saw none. During their first few meetings, Leon realized Tinsley possessed an extraordinary understanding of finance, risk, and long-term business strategy. She analyzed opportunities with remarkable patience and consistently saw value where experienced executives overlooked it. Rather than treating her like an assistant, Leon welcomed her as his closest strategic partner, trusting her judgment on decisions worth billions of dollars. Over the years, they quietly transformed a growing technology company into one of the world's most powerful business empires. Through carefully structured investments and confidential agreements, Tinsley became its largest private shareholder. Leon later named her the hidden heir to the entire organization, believing no one else shared her vision, discipline, or integrity. Because of the company's enormous influence, every detail about its ownership remained strictly confidential. Legal protections and security measures kept Tinsley's identity completely hidden from the public. Only a handful of trusted advisors knew the truth, and each was bound by ironclad confidentiality agreements. Even chief executives of Fortune 500 companies spent months negotiating partnerships without realizing who made the final decisions. They spoke to representatives, lawyers, and senior executives, never suspecting that the woman holding ultimate authority preferred to stay out of the spotlight. While the world searched for the empire's mysterious decision-maker, Tinsley quietly continued shaping its future from behind the scenes. Back in the ballroom, the laughter slowly faded as Leon Ashford stepped away from the head table. Every guest instinctively turned to watch him. Because of his influence and reputation, people assumed he was walking over to deal with the uncomfortable scene. Several even expected him to ask security to escort Tinsley out before the embarrassment ruined the celebration. Instead, Leon stopped directly in front of her. Without saying a word at first, he gently reached down, took the towel from her hands, and placed it on a nearby serving cart. Then, with complete respect, he looked at Tinsley and quietly said, "Ma'am, I sincerely apologize for this." The simple greeting sent a wave of shock through the room. The senior executives who had accompanied Leon immediately straightened their posture. One after another, they addressed Tinsley with the same respect, making it clear they recognized her authority. Their actions weren't rehearsed or hesitant. They responded naturally, as employees greeting the person they ultimately answered to. Silence filled the ballroom. Tinsley's parents stared in disbelief, unable to understand why one of the world's most powerful businessmen was apologizing to the daughter they had just humiliated. Sloane's confident smile disappeared, while Grant struggled to hide his confusion. Vanessa's expression shifted from amusement to concern as she watched the unexpected scene unfold. Leon then faced the stunned guests and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. He apologized for allowing his employer to be treated with such disrespect, saying that what had happened should never have occurred. Whispers immediately spread across the ballroom. No one could make sense of what they had just witnessed, and the Rowan family suddenly realized they knew far less about Tinsley than they had ever imagined. The silence became almost unbearable as Leon looked around the ballroom before speaking again. His voice remained calm, but every word carried enough weight to leave the guests speechless. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," he said. "Tinsley is not my employee. I work for her." A wave of disbelief swept across the room. Several guests exchanged confused glances, convinced they had heard him incorrectly. Tinsley's parents stared at Leon, waiting for him to laugh or explain that it was some kind of joke, but his expression never changed. Leon continued by revealing that Tinsley was the anonymous investor responsible for countless billion-dollar acquisitions and long-term investments that had reshaped entire industries. While the public believed a board of executives controlled the technology empire, every major decision required her approval. Her identity had remained confidential for legal and security reasons, allowing her to operate without public attention. He then revealed another truth that struck even harder. Through the Empire's investment companies, Tinsley personally controlled the debt portfolios connected to both the Rowan family's businesses and Grant Mercer's expanding business network. Every major loan, restructuring agreement, and financial extension ultimately answered to organizations under her authority. The atmosphere changed instantly. Guests who had ignored Tinsley only moments earlier suddenly looked pale. Some quietly stepped away from the Rowan family, unwilling to be associated with the public humiliation they had just witnessed. Unable to accept what they were hearing, Tinsley's parents insisted Leon had made a terrible mistake. They demanded proof, convinced someone else had to be behind the empire. Without raising his voice, Leon handed them official documents bearing corporate seals and legal signatures. As they read the pages, the color slowly drained from their faces, and the truth became impossible to deny. Panic slowly spread through the ballroom as guests struggled to process everything they had learned. Conversation stopped, and the confidence that had filled the room only minutes earlier disappeared. Tinsley remained calm, showing none of the satisfaction people expected to see. She simply looked at Grant and Vanessa before breaking her silence. In a steady voice, she revealed that she had known about their affair for months. She explained that she had never exposed them because their choices would eventually reveal their true character without her interference. Her words hit the room like another shockwave. Grant immediately denied the accusation, but Tinsley calmly mentioned details that only the two of them could have known. Vanessa's expression tightened as she realized there was no point pretending anymore. Sloane looked from Grant to Vanessa, desperately hoping someone would prove Tinsley's claims false. Tinsley continued, explaining that Grant had never truly loved Sloane. His engagement had been part of a calculated plan to strengthen his political ambitions by joining the influential Rowan family. At the same time, he had secretly promised Vanessa that once he secured an important partnership with the powerful technology empire, they would build a future together with wealth, influence, and complete control over their business ventures. Instead of showing regret, Vanessa lifted her chin with confidence. She insisted that none of the accusations mattered because the partnership would soon be finalized. Once the agreement was signed, she claimed, everything else would become irrelevant, and no scandal could stand in the way of their success. Tinsley didn't argue or interrupt. She quietly listened to every word, knowing that Vanessa still had no idea who held the authority to approve or reject the deal she was so certain she had already won. Refusing to believe the situation had turned against her, Vanessa took a deep breath and walked confidently toward Leon Ashford. She forced a polite smile, acting as though nothing unusual had happened. Convinced that business would outweigh personal conflict, she believed the partnership announcement would erase the embarrassment and restore her position in front of the influential guests. Introducing herself with practiced confidence, Vanessa reminded Leon that they had been discussing a strategic partnership with the technology empire for weeks. She spoke about expansion plans, projected profits, and the opportunities the agreement would create. Several guests watched closely, assuming the deal would move forward despite the tension in the ballroom. Leon listened patiently without interrupting. When Vanessa finished, he nodded courteously before explaining that he had no authority to approve the agreement on his own. Every major partnership, acquisition, and investment required the personal authorization of one individual. His tone remained professional, leaving Vanessa even more convinced she was moments away from success. She smiled and confidently replied that she was ready to meet whoever made the final decision. Without saying another word, Leon stepped aside and turned toward Tinsley. Looking at her with complete respect, he asked, "Ma'am, would you like to proceed with this partnership?" The question echoed through the silent ballroom. Vanessa's smile disappeared instantly. She stared at Tinsley, unable to process what she had just heard. The realization struck her all at once. The quiet woman she had mocked, insulted, and dismissed throughout the evening was the only person with the authority to approve or reject the deal she had spent months chasing. For the first time that night, Vanessa understood that her future had never been in Leon's hands. It had always been in Tinsley's. The confidence drained from Vanessa's face almost instantly. Realizing how badly she had misjudged the situation, she rushed toward Tinsley and began offering one apology after another. She insisted that everything had been a misunderstanding and claimed she had never intended to offend her personally. She even blamed the pressure of the evening, hoping someone would believe her excuses. Tinsley listened without showing anger. When Vanessa finished speaking, she calmly replied that respect shown only after discovering someone's power was never genuine. She explained that trust was the foundation of every successful business, and no partnership could survive where honesty and integrity were missing. Looking directly at Leon, Tinsley gave a simple instruction. The proposed partnership with Vanessa's company would not move forward. Every pending agreement, negotiation, and preliminary approval connected to the project was to be cancelled immediately. Leon acknowledged the decision without hesitation. The legal team accompanying him quietly began making phone calls, notifying the appropriate departments that the negotiations had officially ended. The announcement spread quickly through the ballroom. Investors who had been eager to support Vanessa's company exchanged concerned looks. One by one, they stepped away from earlier conversations and quietly informed their advisors that they would be reconsidering their financial commitments. Others simply left the reception without another word. Vanessa stood frozen as everything she had confidently promised herself slipped away in a matter of minutes. The future she had spent the entire evening boasting about disappeared before her eyes, not because of bad luck, but because she had judged a person's worth by appearances instead of character. Tinsley never raised her voice or celebrated. She simply turned away, knowing that some lessons could only be learned after the consequences became impossible to ignore. The ballroom no longer felt like a celebration. The proud smiles that had filled the room were replaced with fear and uncertainty. Tinsley's parents finally understood how deeply their future was tied to the financial network controlled by her investment group. The businesses they had spent decades expanding relied on funding, refinancing, and credit arrangements connected to companies that ultimately answered to Tinsley. For the first time in years, they approached her without pride. Her father lowered his voice and admitted they had made a terrible mistake. He said they had underestimated her abilities and failed to recognize the person she had become. Her mother, fighting back tears, pleaded for another chance, promising that things would be different from now on. They insisted they would finally treat her with the love and respect she had always deserved if she would only forgive them. Tinsley listened quietly, her expression steady. She had imagined this moment many times, but now that it had arrived, she felt no satisfaction. Instead, she saw two people who were frightened of losing everything they had built. She gently reminded them that they had ignored her achievements when they believed she had nothing. They had dismissed her opinions, blamed her for problems she never caused, and humiliated her in front of strangers without hesitation. Their kindness had appeared only after learning the truth about her success. "Wealth didn't change my value," she said softly. "It only changed the way you chose to see me." Her parents lowered their heads, unable to answer. Tinsley made it clear that respect offered only when someone becomes powerful is not real respect. Years of emotional neglect could not be erased by desperate apologies made in a single evening. The days following the gala brought consequences that no amount of influence or money could prevent. News of Grant's deception spread quietly through political and business circles. People who had once praised his character began distancing themselves, unwilling to risk their own reputations by remaining connected to someone accused of dishonesty. Invitations disappeared, important meetings were cancelled, and longtime supporters withdrew their endorsements without hesitation. Sloane struggled to accept that the future she had dreamed about had been built on lies. After confronting Grant with everything she had learned, she realized he had viewed their engagement as nothing more than a strategic advantage. Heartbroken and humiliated, she ended the relationship, refusing to spend her life with someone who had manipulated her trust for personal gain. Vanessa faced a different kind of collapse. The cancelled partnership destroyed her credibility almost overnight. Investors who had once believed in her ambitious promises walked away, existing contracts were terminated, and new opportunities vanished before they could begin. The confidence she had displayed at the gala was replaced by the harsh reality of broken trust. The Rowan family's businesses soon faced their own financial crisis. With lenders demanding immediate repayment and refinancing options disappearing, years of carefully built success began unraveling. Companies that had once competed for their attention now refused to extend additional support. Every financial decision they had made while assuming their position was untouchable suddenly carried painful consequences. Tinsley watched the situation from a distance without celebrating their downfall. She had not created their problems. Each setback came from choices they had willingly made, believing power and status would always protect them. Now they were discovering that every decision, no matter how carefully hidden, eventually carried a price that could not be avoided. As the weeks passed, many people expected Tinsley to finish what had already begun. She had both the legal authority and financial influence to push her family's remaining businesses into complete collapse. No one would have questioned her decision after everything they had done to her. Yet she chose a different path. Rather than acting out of anger, Tinsley instructed her legal and financial teams to enforce every agreement exactly as it had been written. There would be no special favors, but there would also be no unnecessary punishment. Every loan, repayment schedule, and business obligation would be handled according to the contracts both sides had willingly signed. She refused to use her position to settle personal scores. Leon admired her decision, knowing many people in her situation would have chosen revenge instead. Tinsley understood that true leadership required fairness, even when dealing with those who had caused deep emotional pain. She wanted accountability for their actions, not suffering for the sake of satisfaction. Her parents slowly began accepting the consequences of the choices they had made over many years. For the first time, they stopped blaming others for their problems and admitted that their own pride and favoritism had driven their family apart. It was a painful realization, but it was also the beginning of genuine self-reflection. Watching them finally acknowledge the truth brought Tinsley a sense of peace she had never expected. She realized that destroying people would never heal the wounds they had left behind. Real closure came from knowing she had remained true to her values while others were forced to confront the results of their own decisions. In the end, compassion guided her actions, while justice took its natural course. That quiet victory meant far more than revenge ever could. Months passed, and life gradually settled into a new rhythm. Instead of focusing on the painful memories of the gala, Tinsley devoted her energy to leading the technology empire toward an even stronger future. Under her guidance, the company expanded into new industries, investing in advanced technology, clean energy, and innovative healthcare solutions. Each decision reflected her belief that long-term success came from supporting meaningful ideas rather than chasing short-term attention. One of her first priorities was creating investment programs for entrepreneurs who had been overlooked despite their talent and determination. She remembered how easily people judged others by their family name, social status, or appearance. Because of that experience, she wanted every applicant to be evaluated on ability, honesty, and hard work instead of powerful connections. Many promising business owners who had once been ignored finally received opportunities to build successful companies. Leon Ashford watched these changes with quiet pride. Years earlier, he had recognized something exceptional in Tinsley, and now he saw her leading with the same humility and wisdom that had convinced him to trust her. He often told senior executives that the company's greatest strength wasn't its wealth but the character of the woman guiding it. Employees throughout the organization admired Tinsley's leadership. Although she held extraordinary authority, she treated everyone with respect, whether they were executives or new interns. She listened carefully, welcomed different opinions, and never forgot what it felt like to be dismissed and underestimated. The culture of the company began changing because of her example. People felt valued for their contributions rather than their titles, creating an environment where talent could truly thrive. For Tinsley, that transformation became one of her proudest achievements. A year later, Tinsley attended another formal charity gala. This time, everything was different. She didn't arrive as someone standing quietly in the background or as the daughter people ignored. She entered as the respected leader of one of the world's most influential technology companies. Business leaders, philanthropists, and community partners welcomed her with genuine admiration, recognizing her not only for her success but also for the integrity she had shown throughout the past year. As the evening continued, Tinsley unexpectedly crossed paths with her parents. They looked older, humbled by everything they had experienced since that unforgettable night. The pride that had once shaped every decision was gone, replaced by quiet regret. Her father admitted they had spent years chasing status while failing to appreciate the daughter who had always possessed the greatest strength. Her mother softly confessed that they had mistaken kindness for weakness and realized their greatest blessing had been standing beside them all along. Tinsley listened with compassion but without bitterness. She sincerely wished them peace and hoped they would spend the rest of their lives treating people with the respect they deserved. There was nothing left to argue about because the past could not be changed. After saying goodbye, she walked back into the ballroom with a calm smile. She no longer needed anyone's approval to measure her worth. The painful memories that had once defined her had become reminders of how far she had come. As she looked around the room, Tinsley understood the greatest revenge had never been taking everything from those who betrayed her. It was building a life filled with purpose, dignity, and peace. The night she had been forced to clean the ballroom floor had quietly become the moment the world finally discovered her true value.